Hi everyone, welcome to a new installment of the ICUB Workshops and Understanding. It's May 12th, and we're delighted to have Marian Călborean from the University of Bucharest with us. They're called ICUB Workshops and Understanding because on the one hand, they're hosted by ICUB. This is the research institute at the University of Bucharest and the Humanities Division in particular, and their workshops and understanding because we're delighted to be sponsored by the local public funding agency for research. This is WIFISCDI, via project whose code is PN-3 Roman dash P1-1 dot 1 dash PD dash 2019 dash 0535. And once again, we're very grateful to our public sponsor. It's quite a privilege to be able to invite Marian to talk to us about logicalism and the study of natural language. Marian, please take it away.
Thank you, Andre. Um, okay, so the talk is called Logicalism in the Study of Natural Language. I see this little analysis as a research project. I've just started it. Uh, Logicalism, as I will get right to the slide. So logicalism basically is a new topic in the philosophy of language. As far as I know, only Kit Fine tries to use it a little systematically and non-pejoratively about himself and his positions in his recent work on vagueness and on Frege's puzzle. As I was saying, logicalism and logicalists are not well known as terms. They are even missing from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It is, however, sparingly used in philosophy to coin positions in which logical truths are fundamental. For example, when doing metaphysics, Wolfgang Schwarz uses the term that logicism in that particular discussion is the claim that all truths subvert upon purely logical truths, where a purely logical truth is a truth that contains only logical terms. Next, I would like to say that we should not confuse logicalism with logicism. Logicism is a well-known position in the philosophy of mathematics. As advocated by Frege, it claims, to put it simply, that mathematical truths are derivable from logical truths. For example, it is distinguished from formalism, since the latter, that is formalism, may not have the notion of axiomatic truth. As Hilbert puts it, it is surely obvious that every theory is only a scaffolding or schema of concepts together with their necessary relations to one another, and that the basic elements can be thought of in any way one likes. I think this is useful because we will get to discuss the role of logic generally in the philosophy of language, and logic seen as a formalization of natural language arguments. Of course, there are also pejorative uses of logicalism, especially in linguistics, for sterile formalization of the kind derided by the famous author Lewis Carroll. He has in his unpublished notes this example, which is quite funny, I think. Let U be the university, let G be Greek, and let P be professor. Then GP would be Greek professor. Okay, so this seems a little sterile. Now, the plan of the paper, of the talk, is to see how Kit Fine uses logicalism, and then maybe try to see if we can think of it as a coherent approach to philosophy of language. This is just a research project, so I would appreciate your input and comments, maybe at every few slides, if it's okay with you, Andrei. So I can ask if there are questions or objections from time to time.
By all
Andrei?
means, thank you, Marian, for the invite, and I hope everyone in attendance will be happy to ask questions in due course. Thanks.
Okay, so this being the introduction, we'll get to a little technical part concerning Kit Fine's positions. I will try to present them extremely briefly. So we'll have his positions on vagueness, which he calls logicalism, and his solution to Frege's puzzle, just to illustrate what kind of approach he says that is a logicalist approach. Now, starting with vagueness, extremely briefly, the general problem of vagueness is that our common predicates seem to have a zone of indeterminacy in a series of their applications, such that some cases are hard to classify as positive or negative cases of the predicate. For example, it is clear that we can say of a man of 200 centimeters that he is tall. We can say of a man of 150 centimeters that he is tall. It is difficult to say of those in the middle, whether they are tall or not. This is usually known as the problem of vagueness. Fine, before getting to the logical elaboration, he analyzes it as having the statements TM 200 means that we say of the man of 200 centimeters that he is tall. Non-TM 160 is that we say that a man of 160 centimeters is not tall. In his analysis, what we want to really to affirm is this long conjunction, that we should affirm that TM 200, we should affirm that non-TM 160, but we should also affirm all a long list of these kind of conjunctions. If you see them, it is we should deny that a man of 175 centimeters is tall and a man of 174 centimeters is tall. We should deny that a man of 174 is tall and a man of 173 is not, and so on. So under his analysis, the problem of vagueness reduces to denying this kind of switching point. So there should be no men one next to another, which are one a positive case of the predicate and one a negative case of the predicate. This is how he analyzes the philosophical problem, and then he introduces his logical solution. If we are clear up to this moment, so the steps were, this is the general problem discussed by philosophers. This is what he thinks we should achieve. This, he thinks, is the crux of the problem. Now, his logical solution, it is a new semantics only for vagueness. It is called compatibilist. It is simply, for those that I think everybody knows, it is a possible word semantics, but the accessibility relation is non-transitive. It is singly reflexive and symmetric. Then, truth is defined classically as truth assignment in the current world. Find names the world uses. But, and this is the trick he does, negation is true only if the negated expression is not true at any use accessible from it. So you cannot assert non-A, for example, here, if you have A here, okay? So for example, this being the four uses, U with the star, U, V, and W. Here at U, even though we only have the valuation for A, we cannot say non-B because we see here B. So there is a word which is there is a use which is accessible from the current use, which holds B true. Then we cannot affirm here non-B. Okay. Now, if we look to this structure, we can see quite clearly that non-contradiction is true everywhere. And since if we imagine the uses corresponding to each person in the series, we will see that we get this long conjunction as true, as he wants. Now, why is that? Because at this use, we'll see, for example, if this use would correspond to M175, we would see that 174 is true here. And then we would not be able to affirm the negation, and hence the negation of this would be true, and so on for all uses. So by redefining negation and only negation, he gets the truth of this long conjunction while keeping, of course, non-contradiction true. Okay. Now I'll get, and he calls this position a logicalist solution to the problem of vagueness. Then I would like to briefly present his solution to Frege's puzzle. We'll start in the same way with the philosophical problem as generally presented. We say that Cicero is truly informative, while Cicero is not informative. So it seems for a Fregean that there are senses beyond the reference relation from terms to things. As analyzed by Fine, of course, he distinguishes the sentences, namely, he uses different constants, C equals C and C equals C. And then he distinguishes, philosophically, so to speak, he says that Cicero is truly represents objects as being the same, while Cicero represents objects as the same. Now, this distinction between representing as being the same and representing as the same can be exemplified in many ways. For example, if we have a long sentence and we say Cicero cooks, he then sleeps, Cicero and he we're clear that they refer to the same object and they are represented as the same for Fine. So his analysis is not limited to this particular formulation for Cicero. He also treats longer texts such as I said, Cicero cooks, he will be sleeping. So he and Cicero, he says, they represent objects as the same. While at the same time, you can affirm that Cicero is Caesar. You would affirm this falsely, but then if you say Cicero is Caesar, you would represent them, I mean the objects, the people, the two men involved, as being the same. What you claim is that they are the same. Okay? You don't simply treat them as the same. This being his philosophical analysis, he also has a logical solution. His logical solution is simply classical, it's first order classical logic, but in the semantics, of course, identity is defined classically, they have the same reference, the constant, but there is an extra set in the semantics of coordinated pairs of occurrences. So we say that there is a coordination schema noted by capital C in the presentation, which is a relation, it's a set of ordered pairs of, for example, O1C and O2C, where C is an equivalence, and O and T is the nth occurrence of T in the sentence. So if the entire text is this, C equals C, then the first occurrence of C is the leftward one, and the second occurrence of C is the rightward one. Okay, so basically, he adds to the semantics this coordination schema, nothing else is changed, and then he gets to define, he has to say that an identity sentence is non-informative if and only if there is a coordination relation among its two occurrences. There is nothing among the two occurrences of the constant involved. Now, for him, there is nothing more to Frege's puzzle than understanding that some occurrences are coordinated and some are not coordinated. His term is negatively coordinated for missing from this coordination schema. For these brief presentations, are there questions before we get to logicalism as such? or observations?
I think I had a couple of questions, and I'm sure a lot of other people do as well. And I'm wondering if it might be better to wait for the Q&A.
Okay, then I will, so those being just the examples, which are called by him logically. I'll give some quotes from him. In discussing vagueness, he says that the logicalist denies that any distinctive vagueness theoretic notion is required in order to give expression to the kind of indeterminacy that is characteristic to vagueness. He also states that to state the indeterminacy of a predicate, we need make no use of anything beyond the predicate itself and the familiar apparatus of first-order logic. Indeterminacy, in a word, is a logical phenomenon, and no non-logical notions, be they semantic, epistemic, psychological, or otherwise, are required in order to give expression to it. From this, I would extract that maybe we can say that logicalism would be about minimal extralogical commitments, and also that logicalism may be about using the familiar toolbox of classical logic. Now, in his semantic relationism, the book in which he solves the Frege's puzzle, he says that there is a tradition in the philosophy of language which sees the semantics of a given language as a body of knowledge that is somehow implicit in the speaker's use of the language. And then that one would then expect the semantics for his language to behave like an informational rather than a factual domain. And another quote, if this way of drawing the distinction is to be viable, we must conceive of semantics as a body of semantic requirements rather than facts. And then he discusses manifest versus classical consequence, and this corresponds to his idea of semantics as a body of semantic requirements rather than facts. What I would extract from this as a minimal point is that logicalism then may be about having the semantics of the logic capturing speakers' use of the language. I mean the semantics of the language. This is quite minimal, and this inspired me to propose then a tentative definition for logicalism inspired by Fine's work, and then analyze each point in a row. So once we presented Fine's approach, which he calls logicalist, I think we can discuss whether there are such things as logicalist approaches to philosophy of language, which would have, I propose, the following 4 criteria. This is just to organize the debate around this topic, but I think it's a good list. But maybe you have other opinions. I would be glad to hear them. So let me just go through them. Let's suppose that a philosophical approach is logicalist when the following conditions are met. First, natural language puzzle. This would mean that there is a topic of philosophical debate involving examples from natural language, which raise the puzzle, which is largely accepted as such. I will discuss each of them later. The second condition would be that there are no new extralogical commitments. There is no explanatory notion involved that A is non-logical and B is not uncontroversial. This means that for A, we retain the commitments of set theory to the existence of objects, sets, relations, and so on. We may retain the fundamental concepts of the puzzle, but we do not introduce new non-logical concepts. This seems to me to be what Fine did. The third would be solving. The solution should be given through model-theoretical semantics. A logical solution is proposed which involves a respectable model-theoretical semantics. And the fourth point is that we try to minimize the departure from classical logic. That is, the semantics need not be classical, but it will be as classical as possible. So the rest of the presentation is just taking each of the 4 points in order and see whether how I think they can be justified and what issues, both objections and deeper opportunities for discussions they raise. Shall I go on? So we'll discuss each of them in turn.
That sounds ideal. Yes, Marian, if I may. I think we'll all have interesting comebacks in the Q&A, but they're best set up by the full presentation.
Yes, that's okay. Okay. So the first the first condition was that there is a topic of philosophical debate involving examples from natural language, which raise a puzzle which is largely accepted as such. Now, why is it necessary? A reason would be, of course, to circumscribe logicalism to philosophical approaches for natural language. So that's why the part about examples from natural language is there. Now, there being a puzzle, an easy to formulate question where possible answers are both interesting and hard to decide upon, or a paradox, such as the theoretic for vagueness, it seems to be essential for the involvement of logic. Philosophers usually want to see how the puzzle is solved in a rigorous way, and we have such expressions such as show us the good. Now, about largely accepted as such, is that as far as I think, we want the logic if we choose a logicalist approach, or I mean, if we try to maximize the logical approach, as distinct from, let's say, philosophical discussion to a topic, then basically we should accept the puzzle as classically discussed. This is a very, very vague, to put it, condition, and it will raise the question right now. Now, this is one issue which is connected to my PhD thesis, which I think this condition or something like this would raise. So the issue should be that quick formalization, especially the preference for propositional versus quantified logic, may preclude introducing useful philosophical distinctions. That is, we may not want to largely accept the puzzle as such. This is related to the last part, this one. Now, let me just discuss now the example, which is from my PhD thesis. The theoretic is largely, standardly, in 95% of cases discussed as a chain of mode exponents. And then this motivates revisions to the underlying logic of this mode of inference. So there are, for example, the fuzzy treatment of mode exponents and so on. The theoretic is, of course, that we start from a minor premise that a man of 200 centimeters is tall, and then we have a series of conditionals from 200 to 199, from 199 to 198, and then we get that a man of 100 centimeters is tall. Now, to go against this, my PhD thesis analyzes the theoretic as a three-premise argument, the last two requiring quantification. The minor premise is the same, that a man of 200 centimeters is tall, but then there are two premises which are in need of quantification. They cannot be expressed propositionally. The first is divisibility, namely that the difference between 100 and 200 centimeters can be split in pieces of 100 centimeters. And then what I call tolerance is that men at the difference of 1 centimeter cannot be one tall and the other not tall. Now, my proposal for solving the theoretic is simply inserting here most of in classical first-order logic. So just to make sure that it is clear, my opinion is that in 99% of cases, men at a difference of 1 centimeter cannot be one tall and the other not tall. But this formulation of tolerance cannot be split in a conjunction of propositional sentences. So most of men at a difference of 1 centimeter cannot be one tall and the other not tall cannot be split in if most of men of 200 centimeters are tall, most of men of 190 centimeters are tall. If most of men of 199 centimeters are tall, most of men of 198 centimeters are tall. I think it is obvious why, because this majority quantifier would bind the entire pairs of men being at a difference. So it may be that this particular steps hold, and there is an exception, I don't know, between 178 and 177. So that is why for my analysis of the story, it is quantification is necessary, but the disadvantage is, of course, is that I go against the vast part of the literature that analyzes the sorites as simply a chain of propositional modus ponens. And this example that depends on a first order reading of the puzzle, which is non-standard, I would say that it is it is not a logically solution because it requires a deep reinterpretation of the puzzle. So that would be about the first proposed condition for there being a logical disposition. Now we'll get to the second, namely that of no new extralogical commitments, which, as we have seen, is based directly on Fine's text. So my statement was that there is no explanatory notion involved, that A is non-logical and B is not uncontroversial. We retain the commitments of set theory to the notions of objects, set relations. We may retain the fundamental concepts of the puzzle, but we do not introduce new non-logical concepts. Now, why is this necessary? This seems quite clear that for Fine it is to express the semantics of natural language in the semantics of the logic, to assert the primacy of logical analysis, logicalism being about logic, and I think for parsimony, to use ideally only the classical toolbox of logic, which is largely accepted because of its success in mathematics and science. Some issues now that I think this condition raises, which should be interesting for research, is that first, there are some natural language examples which put in doubt the basic toolbox of classical logic, and then it would not be a logicalism to develop a new logic. For example, these are classic limitations of classical logic. The relative predicates such as Jumbo is a small elephant or Jumbo is terribly small. This is an adverbial, really. Or plural quantification, the famous, some critics admire only one another. I would think that in such cases, the new logics proposed with their commitments, for example, those for plural quantification, would not be cases of logicalism, since their basic commitments are different than those of classical logic. So this issue in a way reinforces the condition, the second condition which we discussed. But the next one can be seen as an objection, that it may be argued that the logicalist approach puts undue weight on reasoning, ignoring psychological, epistemic, or metaphysical aspects of language. Now, in the case of vagueness, well, most of philosophers usually call it a phenomenon of natural language, and they think that it lies behind the Sorites paradox, so is in need of independent explanation. For example, Mark Stainsbury claims that it needs a revision of our most fundamental concept of the philosophy of language. Now, for Frege's puzzle, a possible point would be that Frege introduces the distinction of sense and reference for names as a parallel of the same distinction he does for concept words and propositions. For the concept words, we have the unsaturated concept. For propositions, we have the sense is the thought and reference is the truth value. So I don't claim any opinion on this issue, but I think that it needs to be discussed if we want to make sure of what a logicalism or logicalist position would be. So yes, I don't claim any opinion on it right now. Then we'll get, if it's okay until now, I would get to the third condition for logicalism, that the solution should be provided through model theoretical semantics, at least in the two cases given by Fine, it is. Now, why is this condition necessary? Some possible arguments are that since the semantics is concerned with true and by extension meaning, it corresponds neatly with the main domain of the philosophy of language. The model theoretical semantics is built in set theory, which allows great flexibility to insert constructions which correspond to philosophical notions. See the coordination scheme above for fine solution to Frege's problem. And modifying the semantics or adding to it, it generally preserves compositionality of language. This is quite explicitly one of Fine's arguments for his semantic relationist approach to Frege's problem, because the coordination schema is compositional. Yeah. Now, some issues that I think should be discussed in relation to this condition. Of course, that it may be argued that creating a philosophical logic for each topic of philosophical debate is unsystematic. This, I think, is a very, very general discussion. A historical argument would be that philosophical topics and debates are not discrete, they split, join, and so on. But a very, very rich debate is that between the proponents of classical logic as one true logic and those of logical pluralism. Because of its success in most of mathematics and science, classical first-order logic was argued to be correct for one true logic or reason guiding. I think it's what Fine says. Nowadays, logical pluralism is more popular. Varying uses of language require varying logical elaboration. For example, of course, Bill Restall, they have the book Logical Pluralism. I think it is clear that logicalism as approached here would be committed to logical pluralism. Now,
can I ask why? Can I ask why? I don't see the commitment to logical pluralism. Can you explain that?
Because it is, for example, the redefinition of conjunction in the vagueness case is incompatible with the of negation. Sorry, in the vagueness case is incompatible with the classical patterns of inference for negation.
All right, but why is it committed? I mean, I don't like. I'm not.
No, please.
No. I'm not saying like the commitment stuff. Like, is it? What is? I mean, can there be any? Because if you say it's committed, that means that you have to be a logical pluralist to be a logicalist. But maybe you don't have to. I mean, is that the point you're making? That you have to be a logical pluralist?
Yes.
Okay.
But that is because you. That is because now let me say why I think that, because I need to accept Fine's approach to vagueness as logicalist. Now, right. And if you want to be a classical, so to put it, a classical logicalist, we may think that classical approaches to those general problems which are still under debate may have been done already. You know what I mean? I'm just thinking it through.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm coming back at this in the question period.
Yeah, thanks. But I think it's interesting because yes, you can say that you try to analyze philosophical problems by inserting. Well, this could. Well, okay, we'll discuss later.
Okay.
Now, another example which I try to think another issue, and this is really something I would like to research further. I think that it's obvious that any phenomena studied by incompatible philosophical logics may combine, and then we would have indeterminate the logic to use. And I thought of why not combine the metaphysical vagueness and Frege's puzzle, just to see what would happen. I mean, the two positions taken by Fine at the beginning of the presentation. Now, suppose we have a ship christened both evening and morning. It is a ship which suffers structural change akin to the ship of Theseus. The ship of Theseus, of course, is that ship which changed as much as we don't know whether it is the same. Now, we would have a temporal series of the ship by age. We use both E for evening and M for morning. Now, in Fine's vagueness treatment, which he also applies to the problem of identity, so he discusses precisely the problem of the ship of Theseus in one of his articles for this new approach to vagueness. He can deny this kind of, he can get a list of these negations. So he can deny that E at point N is not the same as E at point N plus 1, and so on. So he gets what in his approach to philosophical, to the problem of identity through time. He would also have a semantic relationship treatment of any statement that would equate the two names, evening and morning, or would say that evening is evening. I mean, the ship is just a ship. Now, my question would be just combining them. What about combined statements? In text, just to give a text, this is just a proposal. It's something like, suppose evening first sunk in 1956. In 1957, it was refloated. In 1958, it was 80% replaced. So on for each year. In 1996, it was repainted. And now we claim that in 1997, it was no longer the same ship as morning in 1945. This is an example I'm thinking of combining those two. And now I'm asking whether the vagueness of the relationship, relationist analysis takes precedence. By takes precedence would be that maybe in the, I don't have the full discussion, of course, but maybe in this combination, we would think that also it is easy to say that evening is morning in any year. Once the terms are started to be, or the ship begins to change, also the usages of the two names start to, so to put it, grow apart. So it may be interesting to see whether we hold firm the identity between evening and morning, or on the other side, that maybe it is we want to favor the approach to personal identity, so to speak. Okay. So this, I think, would be an issue which I would like to research further. Okay, so I'll go to the fourth. Now, the fourth condition would be, of course, minimizing departure from classical logic. The semantics need not be classical, but it will be as classical as possible. This seems quite obvious, but why to keep first order logic, classical first order logic, as universal logic and use its power to express most of reasoning? To keep the metalogical properties which are maximally characteristic of first order logic. Now, and why, and another sense of the minimality of the extension may be that were all studied notions translated to the set theoretical semantics, a sterile, that is non-illuminating formalization result. That is why only the minimal elements which can generate, so to put it, it depends on generate means, the phenomenon under study are to be included. So these would be some reasons for this. Now, I would see three issues, and these are the final three issues with this condition. Of course, since we say that it will be as classical as possible, we would be in need to ask ourselves how minimal a minimal departure is. This is studied as partly as the problem of classical recapture for some non-classical logics. This is their former property to display the classical patterns of inference under some suitable setup. It's quite, for example, fuzzy logic with all interpretations limited to truth values 1 and 0 will yield classical inferences. But on the other hand, even for fuzzy logic, for example, Williamson shows that the slightest introduction of a fuzzy truth value, if it will invalidate some classical theorems. Now, how are we to judge whether fuzzy logic is a minimal departure from classical logic? This issue is, of course, open. It is actively under study. I think it is interesting to discuss, for example, how far can we stray from classical logic? Or simply how far we strayed from classical logic. And this is connected with something Fine does in his approach to vagueness. I did not detail. He severs the connection between conjunctive syllogism and modus ponens. Conjunctive syllogism doesn't go through, modus ponens goes through for him. So this is a general point as well. It may be objected that formal adequacy makes one accept philosophical departures, which should be one on philosophical merit alone. And the extremely general point is, should philosophical debates be one on philosophical or formal merit? And finally, the final issue I see at this point is that there are some conservative extensions to classical logic, which involve new entities corresponding to the topic under study, but they are logically inert. Logically inert, I mean by this that they are not used in reasoning or truth attribution. I mean, when saying reasoning, I mean, of course, proof or truth attribution by the logic. So they don't seem necessary for logic as a science of valid inference. For example, precisely the coordination scheme in fine semantic relationism. I mean, here we add to the semantics this coordination scheme, but it is simply to say that, look, this is why C0 is non-informative, because both occurrences are in this coordination scheme. But we have extended the semantics for that. This coordination scheme is otherwise inert, so it does nothing for the logic. Now, if logic is usually conceived as a science of valid inference, then of course it would seem that logicalism is committed to a view of logic as more than the study of valid inference. So I would make a quick recapitulation of the issues, of the 8 issues I identified, inspired by Fine's work. I would say that logicalism, besides the 4 conditions, logicalism in the philosophy of language requires no deep reinterpretation of the initial puzzle, not putting in doubt the basic commitments of classical logic. logical pluralism, and the conception of logic as more than the study of valid inference, and the open issues, which are maybe too general, but however difficult. They are that how much weight should you put on reasoning versus other aspects of language? In possible cases combining more than one philosophically interesting phenomenon, how can we determine the philosophical logic to use? The problem of classical recapture and how to measure the departures from classical logic of non-classical logic. And finally, should philosophical debates be one on philosophical or formal merit? Now, I think these open issues would also clarify how to sketch an anti-logicalist position if one will. So basically just answer them in a way antithetical to logicalism. So that would be my presentation. Andrei?
Thank you so much, Marian. This has been quite a tour de force, and we're all very grateful for your presentation. And happily, unlike other platforms, Zoom also has the applause button, so don't hesitate to join me in thanking Marian. That said, let me just open the Q&A to anyone and everyone who would like to ask a question or make a comment. By all means, please make yourselves known. If you'd like to use the raise hand reaction that our platform happily provides, by all means, please go ahead. Don, is that also a question?
Yes.
Excellent.
I was using the chat. I don't know if that's forbidden.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see.
Okay, so well, thanks, Marian, a lot. That was really interesting. I have a question about D1 and then a question about D2, and then maybe at the end, I mean,
yes, please.
Later maybe we can come back to the issue that I asked about logical pluralism. So concerning D1, right? So you made the case that you need a puzzle for you to be a logicalist. And I was wondering whether that is actually true. I mean, assume that you're studying like a piece of natural language that has no puzzles, right? You know, it just happens. There's no weird puzzles that arise. But you're committed to this kind of, you know, a little bit like what you said about fine, you know, the semantics of the language is the semantics of the logic or something like that. I don't know how exactly you put it, but you know, so you're fully committed to go the logic way, as it were, and call this the semantics of natural language. So why doesn't that? The other things are in place, you know, the other conditions. Why wouldn't that make you a logicalist? Why you need to have a puzzle necessarily? Because it seems to me like the mere fact that you want to account for the natural language in this particular way, that seems to be enough. Again, assuming that all the conditions, right, the other conditions are fulfilled, that seem to me kind of, you know, you could somewhat call a logicalist just because of that. So that's about D1. You want to answer now, or should I go on with the second question?
I think I can accept the objection. I mean, it would be helpful to have an example, but I think it can be accepted because the issue it raises is whether you'll capture in your logic also some patterns of reasoning, you know? And then if you say yes, so it would not be inert as in Frege's puzzle case. If you capture some of them, I suppose that there are some puzzles, at least when expressed classically, you know? Because otherwise, why would you do that logic?
Yeah, well, I mean, so let's imagine it. Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, it's really difficult to imagine a language that doesn't give rise to all these puzzles. But you know, imagine you have to go a little bit local, right? So imagine that there's a language that has no vague expressions. So at least in that area, there's not going to be any puzzles related to vagueness. Can you be a logicalist about that language? Well, why not? And now, of course, you're going to tell me, you know, if you have a, you know, I can go further and further and make like all these crazy stipulations. Like there's no two terms that anybody has ever thought that they refer to the same object, so that there's no Frege puzzles or something. I mean, that's really, I mean, I'm aware that this is kind of like pushing it towards the you know,
Yeah, but
unbelievable. But
yes, thank you. So I largely accept your objection. I'm just thinking whether the thesis, which I said can be held, that there can be no fragment of natural language displaying patterns of reasoning which are not captured classically,
mhm,
which do not give rise to a puzzle, at least when expressed classically.
right.
You see what I mean?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
this can be true. It's interesting. I'll think about it.
yeah. So I mean okay, I'll stop. I think we're in agreement. Can I go on with the second question,
Please.
Andre? Andre, is that okay?
No.
By all means, Don, please
Sorry.
go ahead. And let me just say, I feel I'm learning a lot from your conversation. So don't hesitate. If there's a third question, I don't see anyone that's yet signed up in the chat. So.
Okay, so my second question is about D2 now. So this, I mean, if I understand it correctly, so if you're a logicalist, then you're supposed to, you know, basically, exactly. So there's no explanatory notion involved that is non-logical, right? So I'm interested in that part. And you actually came back to the point that I wanted to make in, I think at the very last slide or something, when you were talking, when you're going back to fine and to this coordination notion. Well, I mean, okay, what is this coordination notion? It's not a logical thing. It seems to be like a semantic thing, right? That he invented or whatever. Like it's a theoretical posit that plays, I think, a crucial role in his account. And it's non-logical, right? As you also said, because it could be inert and so on and so forth.
I said that it is not about valid inference. I didn't say that it is non-logical.
Right. So okay, let's bracket that. But I mean, so why couldn't that be taken to be like a non-logical explanatory notion that is involved in explaining these cases on the same par as, you know, the Frege's distinction between sense and reference, or whatever these people that deal with this puzzle postulate, because there's a lot of things that people postulate, you know. They're not logical. They may be semantic or something, or maybe they have something to do with the way we reason and so on and so forth.
So your question is really whether, if I may I? Your question is really whether the coordination scheme is an explanatory notion for Quine or not, for fine or not.
For fine, yeah. I mean, because it seems to me like this is a very strong. Well, I don't know if it's strong condition, but like, you know. So on one hand, you want the logic to do everything, but on the other hand, you're like, okay, what exactly counts as logical or not? That seems a bit fuzzy.
The apparatus of first order logic. So as far as I understood him and the way I thought when I was speaking about convenience, I was really speaking about metaphysical convenience. I didn't want to put it in the presentation, but I was thinking about committing yourself to the existence of sets, relations, sets, objects, and things like this. You know, so because he says
and nothing else.
And he says the predicate itself and the familiar apparatus of first order logic. Now, once this notion is explanatory, it cannot be only the metaphysics. So I think your point is interesting.
So you're saying that, so you're agreeing with me that this coordination is something beyond of the predicate itself and the familiar apparatus of first order logic, or not?
It is a relation. It is conceived as a relation. So he reduces the a phenomenon of natural language to there being an equivalent relation between some occurrences, you know. So the apparatus is used. Now the question is really whether the coordination schema is an explanatory notion or not.
Well, it seems to be, right? Because that's what he, you know, that's how he explains, as you put it, like the difference between when you have cognitive significance is that there's no when you don't have it, then there's no coordination or something.
If the two occurrences are in the coordination schema, it's there is non-informative. So that's what it is.
So it does play an explanatory role, that's for sure. But I'm wondering what exactly. No, I think it's a bit now clearer, because it's a relation that it's not, you know, something over and beyond or above the apparatus of first familiar logic. But you know.
But this would conflict with my opinion here that there is a little conflict with this minimality. we don't want to put all our studied notions to create some sets and relations for them, and then simply say, look how I solve this philosophical problem is simply by making sets for it, you know?
Yeah. No, that I understand. That seems like, yeah, I agree with that issue. Anyway, so just maybe to conclude, so it doesn't matter how many kind of like theoretical posits you employ, as long as there are nothing else than relations and properties or whatever.
Yeah, I think so.
Is that kind of the, okay, I see. Okay, good.
I think that would be a logicalist. He tries to use the apparatus of logic as much as he can.
Right. Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks so much, Don, for the question and Marian for the answer. Our next question comes from Dragos Bugu. Dragos, by all means, please go ahead.
You're on mute, Dragos. You're still mute. Dragos.
Okay, thank you for your talk again. Could you show me the relative adjective example?
Yeah.
Like this. If I understand you correctly, you are saying that are you saying that this example puts in doubt the classical logic?
No, I say that
because
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, this is my question, because I don't think so. Meaning, of course, this phenomenon cannot be captured in classical logic, but I don't think that it's really a case of putting in doubt.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it. I said that the basic toolbox of classical logic. I mean, yes, I understand your objection. What I wanted to separate from logicalism, conceived like this, would be those replacements of classical first order logic that are not only philosophical or circumscribed to topic of philosophical debate.
Meaning, do you have something like a solution to this, and you are saying that cannot be captured in a logicalist way, or?
Yeah, something like this, but I don't have a solution to it. But I would think that if you have that, the problem is such that if you try to propose a logic for it, you would go intentional logic, and I would not classify you as a logicalist. Now the question is why. I'm not an authority on what logicalism is or not, but I think that there are such philosophical positions, including elaboration of logic, which are deep enough to be something else. I mean, to be more than that. Sorry.
But it's something very speculative, meaning you don't have something like a proof to this, or?
No. But I think plural quantification is quite clear, because the logic for plural quantification are quite different from first order logic. They are even used for refounding set theory and so
on. Thank you. Thank you. That's it.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dragos, for the question, and Marian for the answer. And now I believe we have a quick follow-up from Don.
Yeah, just about the Jumbo is a small elephant thing. I mean, I'm not exactly sure how that is. I mean, why is that such a big problem? So, you know, if you read Hyman Kratzer, they tell you, they actually use exactly this example. And, you know, they just say, well, here what happens is because small needs a comparison class, and usually when you have an intersective, this kind of intersective phrase, and then, you know, the comparison class is given by the noun, but this inside, so the problem, I'm assuming, appears when this is not the case, or when you have a elephant that is not, so Jumbo is not, you know, Jumbo can be the biggest elephant on earth, but he's fighting a huge dragon.
Yeah.
And you know, he's just like a small elephant compared to the dragon, obviously, right? So he's the biggest elephant in the world. So I mean, okay, here you have to do some footwork concerning the comparison classes and whatever, but I mean, everything else seems to remain in place, right? I mean, I don't.
Everything else, if you use comparison classes, but the comparison
Right.
are.
But I mean, small is a gradable adjective. Gradable adjectives,
Yeah.
they all have comparison classes,
Yes,
and maybe even more, right? So I mean, if you go to the exact logical form or the semantic analysis in the Hyman-Kratzer system or whatever system, you're going to find there a lot of other things, right? You might have a threshold and blah blah blah. So there's a bunch of stuff that is.
This objection can be largely accepted, both from you and what Drago said. I need to think it through better. So I mean, what I mean is that I simply mean that there may be some revisions of classical logic which are too deep to be classified as logicalist approaches to natural language. That is my small point to make. Now I'll think better how to make it.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
If you agree, of course.
Thanks so much, Don and Marian. As I make sure to leave a bit of space for everyone in attendance to ponder whether they have any questions outstanding, I'm going to abuse my privilege as a chair and ask a question of my own, if I may, Marian. This starts out as a very mellow, friendly, and half-baked question. And according to what you answer, it may turn out to be
a huge dragon.
Slightly sharper, or it may not. So it seems to me that, so I'm wondering exactly how you'd best like to pitch your talk. It seems to me that you fleshed out a concept of logicalism, right? And you've ascribed this to some of fine treatments of various puzzles. I also wonder if you think logicalism is a good idea. So on the one hand, there seems to be this ground floor debate whether Fine's solutions to various puzzles or Fine's treatment of vagueness or some other such is on the right track. And then assuming with you and Fine that this is a paradigm example of logicalism, there seems to be a first floor level debate about what the most the most accurate concept of logicalism is. And here it seems to me you started out by giving some quotes from Schwartz, I believe, and seem to be very different in at least some respects from the concept of logicalism you ended by fleshing out.
Yeah.
Right. And so I wondered if you wanted to be cautious and non-committal and just articulate a concept of logicalism that you think is better than, say, Schwartz's or something like that. Or if you wanted to stick your neck out and say, no, I think logicalism is the right and true path or something like that. And so I just wonder what the scope of your talk tonight was.
I think I went maybe too quickly through the introduction. So in order, from right now, logicalism is not a term of art. Mm-hmm. So if you want to say that logic is very important for your position or for your proposal in any domain, like Schwartz in philosophy of in metaphysics, you may say that, let me just formulate a position and call it logicalism for the moment. This is how he does. He does not claim that, well, he claims that someone is a logicalist, but he says his exact quote is something like, since logicism is taken, let me use logicalism for the thesis that, you know? But it is not a term of art. He does not quote it from someone, and as far as I know, he's not quoted by anyone else. Now, on the other hand, Kit Fine is the only example which I know, which uses it in a way which seems a little rigorous, or at least he claims of it himself that he's logicalist. He also has a further claim that logicalism is globalism as distinct from localism, but we will not discuss it here. So I don't think it's because I don't agree at all with that. So I don't think I need to present it. So, and when reading Fine, I wondered whether we know that, for example, Kit Fine usually has deep and sophisticated logical approaches to philosophical problems. I wondered whether I can analyze the problems that interest me of the relation between logic and philosophy of language, starting from this term and thinking whether it may be something there, whether it can be transformed into a term of art. But it is not a term of art. So as far as I know right now, I'm just thinking that if I take this criteria, I may identify in the future some positions as logicalist according to this criteria. But it is not that I agree especially with Fine's treatment of either vagueness or Frege's puzzle. But I think it is a good way to, because what really of interest to me is these gradations of using logic. For example, a lot of every philosopher that argues for non-classical logic says that his modification is minimal. You know? And now, how can we arbitrate this? So there is a problem of gradation. When Fine says as a good thing that he only uses the toolbox of classical logic, is this a good thing and nothing beyond that? No explanatory notion beyond that. Is that a good thing or not? These are kind of the questions, the gradation questions, which I am interested in, and I think it is a good entry point discussing logicalism. Now, you also asked whether it is a good idea. I have formed no opinion, no conclusion, but I would think I have a strong intuition that it differs from case to case. So I really think there are areas where a more philosophical approach is necessary, and there are areas in which some kind of technical brilliance may be required.
Thanks so much, Marian. Just to clarify a bit why I was tempted by that question in the first place. So if we just think of the initial rendering that you had there from Wolfgang Schwartz. Schwartz seems to be, he seems to be making very different claims, right? So in your very first slide, you characterize Schwartz's variety of logicalism as saying both that logical truths are fundamental and that, quote, all truths supervene upon purely logical truths, okay? And it's clear that they could be fundamental even though not all truths supervene on them and them alone.
Yeah.
And maybe this is slightly more contentious. Perhaps they could be a supervenience base without being fundamental. So I just wonder what Schwartz is trying to characterize as a view here, but maybe it's just some sort of ballpark issue. Logical truths matter. They're somehow somewhat more basic in a sense that's left to be fleshed out. I'm not sure. Is that your?
No, he discussed about science. So his logical, when he says all truths supervene, by all truths he means all scientific truths. So they're all scientific truths.
I see, but
okay. Now I could have had such an approach to philosophy of language, but I think it is completely impossible to formalize philosophical truth. So I could claim too that logicalism in the philosophy of language is the claim that all philosophical truth can be expressed logically with the, you know?
Right. So I get that. I guess if we just took this sort of intuition, if you like, because it's clearly not fleshed out, that logical truths are somehow fundamental. I wondered about this because it seemed that, because I wonder how this fared with Fine's relationism. And I'm a bit rusty on Fine's initial book, Semantic Relationism, so please help me out here. But I thought the point with Frege's puzzle was that if I say Cicero is Cicero, and if I say Cicero is Tullius, right, there are going to be different coordination schemata there, right? And that's going to, in some sense, account for the difference in cognitive significance of the propositions expressed by the two respective sentences. But now if we think of the very word coordination, it sounds as though, and this is where I'm blanking out. Fine talked about coordination in thought, about coordination between various speakers of one and the same language, and so on. So it seems as though the very logical, the sort of the model theoretic first order semantics, even though it's not, I don't know, Tarski style semantics, but it's still first order, right? That in some sense just leaves the coordination schemata there, and we're supposed to figure out whether it's coordination in thought, or between speakers, or between the thoughts of different speakers, and so on. So in some sense, the semantic truth in question is not fundamental, right? It supervenes on the reality of what people are thinking and saying, and it gives some sort of formal expression or representation to that reality. So it seems as though this is really against whatever Schwartz thought when he said the logical truths are fundamental, because here the C, the capital C and the small c are just meant to codify in formal semantics something that pertains to something entirely different and much richer, namely what happens in people's thought and in the coordination between one and another speaker in dialogue. So I just wonder if that's the way you saw things, or?
I agree with your point. So it is not. Yeah. So I totally agree with your point. I still don't think you should take Schwartz as definitory for logicalism. It was just an example of how logicalism is used in the literature, and especially that it is used, as I wrote, sparingly and non-systematically. So I am not in any way committed to the notion that logicalism is holding that logical truths are fundamental in any way.
I see.
So not at all. My 4 conditions for logicalism in the philosophy of language should be these 4, and that's it.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. So problem cleared. Thanks so much, Marian. And I believe we have a next question from Andrei. Andrei, please go ahead.
Thank you. Here's a pretty naive question regarding the motivation behind this logicalism. Why exactly do we need, or do we want to stick as close as possible to classical logic? For example, when you gave in the beginning the examples of vague attributes. For example, my height is 179. If you ask someone if it is true that I'm tall,
I tell you, I'm for classical logic and you are tall, and that's it.
Sorry?
I was joking, but I am for classical logic.
Oh,
and
okay.
I will tell you that you're tall. So.
Oh, I see. No, I was thinking that the intuitive answer coming from a day-by-day conversation would be something like, is he tall? Well, yeah-ish, I guess. He's not like he's 2 meters tall, but there's what I'm trying to say is that our most common intuition when it comes to vagueness is attributing degrees. And why are we trying to avoid this approach? Why is that not good for, or for example, for the Sorites argument? For example, why should we agree, or should we agree in the first place that a man who is 2 meters tall and someone who is 199 should give the same truth value of when attributing the word tall to it? Why should we not accept degrees in the first place?
Well, you speak as a proponent, a full-hearted proponent of fuzzy logic. So that's the argument for fuzzy logic, what you said. My generally non-classical logics have the some problems which I presented, namely that when you combine discourse, for example, precise discourse with vague discourse, what is the logic you want to use, you know? Or
well, the weaker of the two ones, or something like that.
Yes, but then some classical theorems would come out false, as Williamson says.
I see.
You know, so you have this problem. Then you have also the problem in, I think it can be put it more general for more logics, but fuzzy logics is usually accused of artificial precision, that your feeling that you don't know how tall you are is replaced with the precise value of 0.4567 and so on. This is just a counter argument.
Well, it's interesting that you use the word feeling, and I think that this fuzzy logic is quite truthful to our human intuitions at the end of the day. You mentioned that classical logic works pretty well in science and technical stuff, but science usually avoids working with vague stuff, or they try to quantify it. So
is there, so you're the opinion that there is something that is not quantifiable in the world? I'm just thinking, and the first part of your question was now, I wanted to say something, but I forgot.
I was talking about why the need to avoid the approaches such as fuzzy logic.
We need not avoid that. They are very productive and they are quite useful. Now, no, I forgot what you said.
No, basically this was the question. Why do we want to stick as close as possible to classical logic in the logicalist approaches?
Well, because first of all, it works, so it has great success in, as you said, but it also integrates the various domains of philosophy. It was argued that it is reason leading. This means that correct thought follows the paths of first order logic, classical first order logic, and it has. Let me just review the arguments discussed here. Now, these are the arguments. I'm not sure whether they are convincing. But
yeah,
I think
if I may very quickly interject here, a quick follow-up comment, which would segue into Dunn's follow-up, which I believe are all on the very same issue. And so that would give you a richer opportunity to tackle all of the issue at one blow. So there's this familiar quip that if you have a hammer, everything in the world seems like a name, right? So if everybody's been trained in first order logic, obviously they'll have some dent to represent various natural language phenomena in first order logic, right? If by some chance, some weird happening, they had been thoroughly trained in higher order logics with some non-standard interpretation of the quantifiers, you take your pick, no matter which one. Presumably they'd see things very differently, and they'd be so much more of a flurry of studies that are quote unquote non-classical. The mere, it would seem as though the mere happenstance that curricular orthodoxy privileges first order logic doesn't necessarily carry normative weight in the methodology of analyzing natural language in formal terms. So I just wonder that might be a quick follow-up to what Andrei was saying, and I wonder if it segues into Don's logical pluralism follow-up to the follow-up. And so Don, would you care to confirm or disconfirm what I just said?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my initial question was why logicalism is committed to logical pluralism, and I think, like, you know, when Andrei asked the question, why this obsession with classical logic and so on and so forth. So I mean, I was thinking, well, so it seems that there seems to be a tension, right? On one hand, this idea that you have to be as classical as possible, but on the other hand, if you, as you admit, you're committed to logical pluralism, you might accept, you know, non-classical stuff or whatever, different kind of logics, like of the type that Andrei just mentioned. I mean, I have to say that I'm very bad at logics. I have no idea what's happening. But you know, I mean, but I can see that, you know, it seems to me that there is a tension here. So on one hand, you want to be as close to the classical stuff, but if you agree that the logicalist is committed to logical pluralism, then you would need to, at least in some, or for some issues, or for whatever parts of language, to give up the closeness to classical logic. So yeah, I mean, I don't, like, this was my initial question, how these things fit together. I don't know if that makes the discussion more fruitful, probably not. But that was my
yes, it's I perfectly understand your point. However, it is hard to add something. What I would like to say is that we need to understand what, first of all, what classical logic is. For example, is a conservative extension such as adding the coordination schema for phrases puzzle, is it a form of logical pluralism, or is it classical logic pure and simple? Just adding to the semantics another entity, and we say, look, this entity corresponds to your philosophical phenomena, you know, because it expresses this characteristic of natural semantics, you know. In my opinion, it is a departure from classical logic, although it is conservative. It is conservative, namely that it doesn't affect the truth, and it is inert. It is even inert in that case. But this is about the, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, this is going to give you only that much, because you're not going to be, I mean, obviously, I don't know about obviously, but if you're a logical pluralist, probably you're going to accept these extensions that are not conservative.
Yes,
right, exactly.
So
then the issue remains. I mean, this your reply is kind of like, you know, chipping off from the problem, but not like addressing it head on. And I think actually this maybe goes back, if I may continue. I don't know.
Please, no, continue.
Wait, what did I want to say? I think I forgot my idea. Don't worry about it. maybe it's coming back.
I would like to say about what Andrei commented, that the pedagogical. I'm not an expert in the education of philosophy in no way, so I cannot cite any statistics of how often is classical first order logic studied or not. But I have read about the emergence of first order logic, especially the work of how is it called? Our friend from Sweden, Matti Eklund. So Matti Eklund, which is an expert in the emergence of first order logic, he puts most weight for it on the appearance of model-theoretical semantics. So I think this is the crucial point, and maybe the crucial point also in this approach to logicalism in the philosophy of language, because from it, Tarski gave a quite neat definition of truth in it, and it also has the maximal formal properties. I mean, Lindström's theorem shows that it is the strongest logic for which other two meta theorems hold. So the emergence of model theory made first order logic the universal logic. Before that, people used second order logic, and he attributes its success to this parallel with its model theoretical semantics, which has these nice properties. And of course, the definition of truth, which is quite irresistible. So but in my opinion, especially if you add this kind of philosophical uses, the semantics will make the logic go a little away from its conception of, in general, of logic as science of valid inference, because we'll add more and more philosophically interesting things to the semantics, which may not correspond with patterns of inference.
I remember my thing. Can I say it?
Yes, yes, please, please.
Yeah, so actually it's on that. So, and it kind of goes back to Andrei's previous question. I mean, in principle, you could be a logicalist and, you know, as you say, be committed to logical pluralism and not obsess so much about, you know, first order logic or any kind of logic, whatever. Just, you know, keep some thesis, like some core thesis, like, I don't know if the ones that Schwartz mentioned, or I mean the ones that you have here,
yeah,
and so on and so forth, and then you're still like a logicalist, you know.
But it's not considered the logic right now if it doesn't have a kind of completeness and correctness, for example.
Yeah,
So
sure. I mean,
if we simply label things and formalize them, then we'll be derided. So if I say, let me just show you. So it needs to have the general structure of a logic to be a logic, you know?
Right. Yeah, no, I agree.
A lot of work, as far as I know, all the logics, all philosophical logics are at least attempted to have a completeness and, if possible, or incompleteness demonstration and correctness. So
yeah, right. So yeah, so I mean, of course, right. But so my comment was just to say, because Andrei asked you, like, what's the purpose of you discussing logicalism? And to me, it seems like, you know, you're doing a little conceptual engineering, how people put it today, about logicalism, right? So
yes,
you wanna exactly.
We are together, I think.
and then the point is like, well, in this, of course, if you do conceptual engineering, then it's important what your goals are and so on and so forth. But like, you know, in principle, you could have a notion of logicalism that is not necessarily wedded to the classical logic as like a, you know, the like the condition sine qua non, right?
I think if you're for a competitor of first order logic, for example, for second order logic, as Stuart Shapiro and some other variants, which hold that we should replace first order logic in all its uses with the more powerful second order logic, then you can be a logicalist for second order logic. That's
exactly. Right.
I'll
okay,
know
cool.
that.
Thanks.
All right, thanks so much. And I think we've all done our fair share of questions, but there's so many left unasked. Marian, so much, and this was so rich. I wonder.
Tomorrow at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Right, right. So I wonder if there are any last minute comments or reactions, questions, objections. If not, let me ask a quick follow-up to Don's better rephrasal to my initial question. Suppose we consider all of these solutions that Kit Fine has advanced, Ray various puzzles, and we consider them in light of the concept of logicalism that you have delineated, right? And there are those 4 necessary conditions that are jointly sufficient for an approach to count as logicalist, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
I wonder, methodologically speaking, or in a broader vein, what further light is shed on these solutions by calling them logicalist? So for instance, if we consider Tarski, or if we consider Klein or Kripke, would their approach fail to be logicalist, or are there internecine differences between logicalists in their providing different solutions to the same puzzles? Or how should we best construe the methodology of logicalism that sort of underwrites how you've reconstrued Kit Fine's approach here? Thanks.
Well, I think it would be, let me just say, I think we need to be sincere, so to speak. And if we identify some, for example, two competing approaches to some philosophical topic, and we identify one of it as logicalist, we would say we have the logicalist approach here, and we have the non-logicalist or less. So I think it may be useful as a tool for classifying philosophical positions. This is, of course, extremely dangerous in analytic philosophy because people want to be called usually by the names they give themselves. So maybe, I don't know, Fine accepts that he's a logicalist in philosophy of vagueness, but someone else would deny it, you know. As I said, it is dangerous to do meta philosophy of language. So I'm not trying to do that. I just want, it serves as a way to see more clearly other problems, in my opinion. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is entirely reasonable and charitable. The reason I asked this was one might have wondered if logicalism sort of finds a red thread in the history of the philosophy of language, or if it, in some sense, delineates a penchant for formal approaches that are also first order, that are also, say, model theoretical and not translational, that are object oriented instead of substitutional, and so on. So I was wondering if there's some kind of, red thread to follow there, that the concept of logicalism that you fleshed out it would in some sense latch onto. But I think this is just fantastic work for all of us to ponder, and so thanks so much for that. And
I'd like to have the final word, if possible.
Yes, please, by all means, go ahead.
No, because I saw that Dan found the anti-logicalism website. The last slide, I found something even more interesting. This one. This is an anime game. It is called Luck and Logic, and it says that in the year mankind faces an unprecedented crisis, to the young logicalists whose nature of luck and logic, the future of the world has been entrusted. And of course that logicalist powers are awakened during adolescence, but you should be careful, the power gradually fades away during adulthood. So if you want to be a logicalist, do it as quickly as you can.
So the thought here is that the luck and logic are different characters?
It's a TV series or something like this. No, it is called Luck and Logic, but inside the series, there are this race, to put it like this, of logicalists.
Well, what a fantastic ending to a talk. Marian, thank you so much for the incredibly theoretically rich and not at all cartoonish views you've carefully analyzed, put forward or objected to. So thanks once again, and let me also use the applause button to signal my appreciation. See you all in 2 weeks' time when we'll have a new workshop in the ICUB series and workshops in understanding. Thanks once again to Marian Călborean and to everyone in attendance, and have a fantastic afternoon.
Thank you very much, Andre, and everyone. Thank you.